Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Best of Pedalshift. This is part 2 of my Olympic Peninsula Brompton tour from 2018, and it was originally podcast March 29th, 2018 as Pedalshift project number 112. Look, the show notes are a little all over the place, I'm noting, because I was counting day 0 as day 1, and the fact that I tended to record after the rides, it was a mess. It was a little bit of a mess. So here's the itinerary just to kind of get that all squared away here. In part 2, the first day was from Skokomish to Montesano. That was the Sufferfest, and I ended up in a hotel. Day 2 of the ride was from Montesano to Aberdeen and then south to Raymond, Washington, where I stayed at the Pitchwood Ale House, as you'll hear about in this episode. Day 3, also in this episode, from Raymond to Astoria. In the show notes, I talk about day 4. There was no day 4, unless you count day 0 as day 1. Anyways, that's the whole idea here. You know, it's interesting to hear me in my more hardcore keto ways when I was trying to avoid sugars in the midst of the ride. You know, I'm still into not eating sugar, as I talk about, it feels like all the time. But despite my new take that eating simple carbs during ride seems to help rather than hurt, I had the opposite opinion at that time, and I think I've changed my mind. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case it all seemed rather confusing. Listening to this tour journal again has me really looking forward to getting out west to ride. It's now, as I said here, been over a year since I last rode in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm really looking forward to getting out there again, whether it's Washington, whether it's Oregon, or whether getting all the way down to San Francisco at some point. And maybe with some of the good vaccine news that we're getting, I can be a little bit more optimistic about all that. Okay, here's part 2. Next up on the show is the journal, and it is the second part of the Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 9 Olympic Peninsula. Really excited to bring these last 2 segments to you, days 3 and 4. I kind of liked having the statistics last episode, so we're going to have more statistics here. Day 3, the cycling was 36 miles. I visited the Kurt Cobain landing in Aberdeen, Washington. Mentioned that on the show, or in the journal as well. Day 4 was the bigger of the 2 days. Cycling-wise, it was 51 miles. But the interesting part about that, and I wish I talked a little bit more about this. I did talk about the bridge crossing. But as I'll get into it, the big feature of day 4, the sort of the finish line, was crossing the Astoria Megler Bridge that spans the Columbia River. And 8% of my 51 miles that day, which seems like an enormous amount, was literally crossing the Columbia River on that bridge, because that bridge is 21,474 feet, or just a touch over 4 miles, or 6.5 kilometers for you metric types out there. That is an enormous bridge. It turns out it is the longest continuous truss bridge in North America. That means very little to me, other than I know that it was very long and it had a minimal shoulder. But it's kind of a fun ride. But if you had said, Tim, how long do you think that bridge was after I rode that? I would have said about half that distance. I didn't realize that it was actually 4 miles long. And on that little clown bike, it was kind of a sight to behold, I'm sure. So anyways, without further ado, here comes days 3 and 4, wrapping up part 2 of Pedalshift Tour Journals, Volume 9, Olympic Peninsula. So, it's been a day. The day was supposed to be on the short side, and I think mileage-wise it was. But when all was said and done, I felt as cooked today as I did as the day, the Sufferfest 2018, as I think I'm going to call the first day of riding. Which, to be honest, doesn't make a lot of sense. But at the same time, you know, I know, and many of you who have ridden before probably have experienced the same thing. Some days you just don't have it. And that certainly was the case today for me. I was, I started late. I was well fed. I was, I think, well rested, well caffeinated, all of the things that are good for a tour. And when all was said and done, it ended up still being kind of one of those days where
I hopped off the bike on some of the hills and just said, "No mas, man. I'm pushing up this thing." Which, I can probably attribute to a few things. Number one, I still was in a bit of a recovery mode from the day before. Number two, it's the first tour of the season and I haven't been riding a lot. So maybe that's a factor. Almost assuredly has to be. Even though these were not hills of real significance. But I would have to say some of them were a little on the steeper side. They were, those kind of short, steep hills, but they weren't that steep. And they were definitely short. So no excuses. Third, frankly, it's the Brompton. It's an upright, style. I find it's harder to sustain on this bike compared to a larger bike. Works fine. Obviously, I jammed out about 50, I did about 38 miles today. I think I'll have to double check on that, which for me is a very, very short day. So to feel the way I felt at the end of the day seemed incongruous. I'm going to throw in a couple of other factors as well. I did not space my eating or hydration very well. The hotel that I was in Montesano had a free breakfast, so I grabbed a bagel and cream cheese. Not the kind of food that I've been eating lately. I don't tend to eat grains or breads or anything like that, but I thought, hey, free, right? And I had that when I stopped in Aberdeen, which was about, maybe 10 miles away. And then I rode straight from Aberdeen, 25 to 28 miles, to here in Raymond. And, I don't think that was the right move. I had other kind of I had sort of leftover snacks, and it's a lot of crappy junk food. And so maybe that's a factor in there. I didn't have any extra caffeine injections. I did not bring my caffeine pills, which I think is a big mistake. I find caffeine is a very helpful tool. I've talked about that on the pod numerous times, but I also didn't have any other additional coffee. I didn't have any additional forms of caffeine, your Red Bulls, your whatever. So I'm thinking that may be a factor as well. I really was struggling at the end. Enjoying it. Pardon my yawn. It is a bit on the late side. Yeah, I enjoyed it, but, I was really happy that, Raymond was, when I got to Raymond, especially since the final hit, it was a downhill that took me right into Raymond. The last hill, I was like, oh, good, another hill. And it's funny, I've ridden this route before, this portion of the route, at least from once I hit 101. And, it was shockingly familiar to me. I was like, oh yeah, I remember this was challenging for me back in 2014 as well. Curiously so. And I think that this is the type of thing that I know a lot of folks who do the Trans Am run into. A lot of many, many, many hills, short, steep, not very big. You go up, you go down, and then there's another one. And it's just how it is. It's a big thing bicycling back east, which is why I like coming out west a little bit more. So I think that the terrain was the most interesting element of everything. The weather was fantastic. I mean, it's bicycle touring podcast, dude. All we talk about is weather and food, right? So weather really was nice, and a huge, huge benefit from Sufferfest 2018. I will say I considered briefly yesterday that, maybe I should push forward and get to Raymond or something. No, that was a tough slog to get to Montesano, yesterday. So today, it took everything I had. It was very interesting. It goes back to my, I think, original theories on the fact that when you ride and you know what your ultimate destination is, your mind sets your physical limits, and you're physically done when your mind says it is. So if your expectations are to ride 38 miles like I did today, even though it was a short day for me compared to yesterday and what tomorrow will be, you're ready. You're done by the time you get to that point. It's super fascinating. At least it's something I've experienced. I don't know about anybody else listening to the show, if you experience that as well. but it's definitely part of how things work for me, that when I set my mind to something, I can accomplish it and not much more. It's very funny. So got to Raymond. I don't think there was much to note about the trip. Oh, I'm sorry. I should talk about Aberdeen a little bit. I went to Kurt Cobain Landing, which is this really chill, really cool little park. And when I say little, it's maybe, 50 yards by 50 yards at most. It's probably even less than that. And it's right on the banks of the Wishkah River, which, it was kind of, if you get into this backstory of Kurt Cobain a little bit, that was kind of where he hung out a little bit when he was, younger and whatnot. And it was just kind of fascinating to sit there and eat lunch and listen to some Nirvana. And, there were some really nice, low key kind of, memorials to him there, which was pretty cool. Some people had scrawled some stuff on benches that, said thank you for your gift of music and stuff, just stuff like that. It was really understated and cool. I think that it fit what at least I think I know about what he would have been cool with. He was not some ostentatious dude. So, it was cool. The last trip through, I did not go there. And, today I was like, I have extra time. I can do an extra 10 miles. I don't want to get to Raymond too early. Little did I know it'd be slow. And, it was cool. It was worth it. It was definitely worth it. And, then I was just on 101 the whole way down, and the aforementioned kind of ups and downs, getting down to Raymond, Washington. Raymond's a bit of much more of a logging town. It's right on the banks of the, I got to say it right now, the Willapa River, which I've been mispronouncing for my entire life. And, this place, the Pitchwood Ale House and Inn, is a really interesting place. The outside of it, it looks like, kind of a beat up old hotel, but inside that they've done some cool renovations, and I'm in a bunkhouse. Currently I'm alone. It's a Friday night. I don't know if I'm going to get some drunken roommates by the end of the night. We'll see how that goes. More tomorrow. But it's really inexpensive to stay here. Now, I could have spent way more money and got my own room, but, roll the dice, see what happens. I got my bike all set up. Basically, if I do have roommates by the end of the night and I'm getting up at, say, 7 a.m., I'm just going to roll right out and go. I'm going to throw on some warmer clothes and make it happen. That's just basically how it's going to go. But kind of a cool place. The ale house was good. It was relentlessly northwest, rural northwest logging town kind of a place. But, younger people were in there. It was a really interesting vibe. Staff was super cool, and I really enjoyed it. So got a nice good dinner like I did last night, and that was a real kind of battery recharge for me, and had a few beers, enjoyed that, including something from the Willapa Brewery, which was really good. A hoppier blonde, which I don't like blondes typically, but some extra hops in it, not so bad. I kind of liked it. It had more of an IPA vibe, which is typically my beer of choice, especially when I'm riding in the Northwest. Bike performed well. I've sort of talked a little bit about its limitations. I will say, again, probably because it's an early season ride, and because, I didn't quite get the saddle height right yesterday, but was much better today. My Achilles on my right is definitely doing, I don't know how to describe it. It gets crinkly. I don't know. It just feels like that there's, I've probably got some micro tears in it or something like that. It always heals up. It's fine, but I notice it. And, it's just one of those things that I'm glad tomorrow's sort of my last day of riding. I think that this was great as sort of a tune-up ride for the beginning of the season, but yeah, I think Sufferfest 2018, as I'm calling yesterday, probably did a few things to me that weren't so good. I just sort of gutted through some stuff that, if it was a drier day or a little bit better day, I would have readjusted the saddle. I would have readjusted the whole, all the backpack and everything so that I wasn't getting the heel strike. Would have done a lot of things, but got it through it, got my miles in, got to where I needed to be, and it was all good. But I do think that there are consequences sometimes when you aren't riding in the positions that you're supposed to be riding in. It's a lot of stress on your body, and it doesn't matter, what your age is. If you are doing repetitive stress on things, your body will punish you for it. So it doesn't hurt, but it's a space where I know that if I kept going on it over the next bunch of days, that it would definitely rear its ugly head. I ran into this, not so coincidentally, on my very first tour, my initial Sufferfest, oh God, what would that have been, 2011 or whatever it was, when I did the climate ride. And I remember at the end of that trip, I was literally tying bandanas around my Achilles tendons, both of them, especially the right one. Because I needed extra support because it hurt so much by the end of that ride. Because I just wasn't used to it. I wasn't used to hills. I wasn't used to the stuff that I was dealing with. And that was back when I was using toe cages and stuff that I just don't use anymore. That I learned caused me more trouble than good. So in any event, it's a ongoing issue that I deal with periodically when I don't ensure that I am pedaling the way I should pedal in the position that I should pedal. Word to the wise, if things aren't feeling right, adjust, because if it's not feeling right in miles 1 through 5, it's gonna be bad for you in subsequent miles as well. I'm sure I'll be fine. It's all good. I'm enjoying it. So in the bunkhouse here at the Pitchwood Inn and Ale House, or Ale House and Inn, cannot remember the naming conventions here, but they're cool with it. Tomorrow is a longer ride than today. It's probably about an even 50 miles, which is longer than yesterday. Not ideal considering I have 2 bus options that I need to grab, from Astoria to Portland, or I'll have to spend the night near Astoria, which is fine. There's a state park not far from there if I needed to. But I would really prefer to get into Portland tomorrow and sort of tie a bow on this tour. Although I certainly could extend if I needed to. But I think that I should have no problem making the second bus at worst, but I would kind of like to make that 2:45 bus. So that's why I'm going to try to get out of here at a reasonable hour around 7. I'm not going to make the same mistake as I did last time, meaning today. I am going to go, there's a grocery store in town here in Raymond that is open at 7. And I'm going to go there and I'm going to get a bevy of decent snacks for the ride, like the heavy snacks, maybe some breakfast sandwiches, some burritos, something more to kind of get going. I'm going to make sure that I've got some caffeinated beverages as well, sugar-free if I can get them. I've been pretty good about staying out of the sugar on this trip. But yeah, I think I'd like to make sure that I've got that. So I've got my water bottles already filled. Tomorrow's going to be warmer. Tomorrow's going to be just as sunny. I went through 3 water bottles on this ride and zeroed out my final water bottle right before the end of this ride. So I'm going to want to make sure that I have more than just those 3 for going down to Astoria, because I anticipate that I'll need more hydration than that. So that's sort of the plan. I do believe that the train is kind of similar, so I expect to be on the slow side. I do remember that it's really beautiful during some stretches of this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the Columbia River again. Love crossing it. Last time I saw a harbor seal as I was crossing it, and I think I've said this on the pod, just sort of looked at me like, what are you and what are you doing? So on the little clown bike, it'll be an even better experience if said harbor seal or one of its progeny are there. That would be kind of cool. So yeah, that's the day. Get down to Astoria. I hope to be able to do a final installment for this series. I don't know if it's going to be in Astoria. I may have plenty of time on my hands if I miss that 2:45. I think that the next bus is like a 6 or a 6:30. But if I make that 2:45, the final installment may indeed be in Portland, Oregon.
So the final day had everything that the first day was missing. It had good weather. It had shoulders, which
frankly, is one of the pieces that I haven't talked about regarding the state of Washington, at least the route that I went on. There are great roads in the state of Washington. They just don't happen to be in this section so much until the final day. Going from Raymond, the shoulders widen considerably. Once you get basically back on 101 again, some of the other roads that I was on for this trip were substantially more shoulderless. And that is, for many people a deal breaker. And I completely understand that. The one thing that I'll say is that the roads with the fewest shoulders tend to be the ones with the least amount of traffic. I also, in my experience, have had good experience with the operators of motorized vehicles, whether they're commercial drivers or whatever. I think I talked about this on one of the other day's summaries, but it is nice when you leave a town and you've got not just that minimum 3 feet, or in some instances less. I mean, during some times of year, when the shoulders aren't being maintained very well, you're going to have a lot of grit and gravel, and you really can't ride on it, especially when it's wet. And that was certainly the case for some of the shoulders that I dealt with this past few days. So when all is said and done, having extra shoulders, very helpful, very nice, makes the experience that much better. When I left Raymond, I realized, or I shouldn't say I realized, the prior day, as I'd mentioned, I was pretty cooked after a minimal amount of riding. And I really chalked that up to not feeding myself enough while I was riding. The terrain was not nearly as flat as I had remembered. I looked at the elevation profiles. They didn't look that daunting, and they really aren't under most circumstances. If you're not loaded very heavily, and I think if you're on a standard bike, I think that this is a pretty easy section of the Pacific Coast. However, I was on the little clown bike. I was on the Brompton, and the geometries of everything made short, steep hills and the frequency of them that I was getting a lot more difficult. I think that that's one of the takeaways for this for me, is that I think doing fully loaded touring on the Brompton, while possible, is probably better on less terrainy surfaces, which isn't to say that you can't do it. And I probably will do it again. But I think that if I have a choice like I did for this tour of doing a full-size bike, I think I might take the full-size bike for hillier, more terrainy, more longer rides. And that's not to say that this wasn't an amazing tool. I mean, what I'm excited about is that this bike is going to be coming back with me. It's going to go above. I've got so many different things. Also, I'll fast forward for a moment. It was really great bringing it back and being able to effortlessly hop onto transit to get me back to Portland, which is where I'm at right now. So, leaving Raymond was cold. It was only in the 30s. I left early enough. I had thought that it gave me a shot at making a 2:45 bus, which would have gotten me into Portland closer to 6:30. As it turns out, it was pretty good that I didn't do that. My nephew ended up having, he's got some medical complications, and they had to go to the emergency room. Everything was fine, but it happened right when I would have arrived. So it would not have been a good timing ultimately. As it turns out, a variety of factors got me onto the late bus, and I think that it was the best thing all around in retrospect. But I tried to leave early enough to give myself enough time to get to that early bus. But also, like I said, as I was ping-ponging back and forth on topics in my own brain here, to get food for the ride, because you don't go through a ton of towns after you leave Raymond. There's basically one more town of note, and then all of a sudden you're pretty much on your own for a while. There was one town that I was able to go to for sort of a resupply of water and basically lunch, but I wasn't going to bank on it. So I went to the tried and true place. I was going to go to a grocery store and get stuff, but right next to it was a McDonald's. Now, I am not a McDonald's guy by any stretch of the imagination. unless I'm on bike tour, because you can get some reasonably decent Wi-Fi, and also I at the time it was like, okay, I can grab a coffee, and I tend to like their egg burritos. They're easy. They're inexpensive, especially at breakfast time, and they're really, really good for just having a little bit of a calorie punch. That tastes reasonably decent. They stay okay over the course of a few hours. So I bought a bunch of those and just said, okay, this is going to be my breakfast, my snacks and lunch as I go along. And they work really well. It's a nice little protein pop, and you've got the tortilla for a little bit of carbs if you're needing carbs. I try to avoid them, as we've talked about ad nauseum, but it was the difference between having something like that versus sugar. I'll do that every time. So rolling out of there, I thought, okay, I've got enough time if I'm a little bit slower than I am on the bigger bike, the Safari. And I kind of knew that wasn't going to be enough by the time I rolled out of there. I talked to my girlfriend, Kimberly, and, that put me back at another 20, 30 minutes. And I was like, you know what? Let me give this a shot. It's kind of pie in the sky that I was going to make that bus. And as it turned out, that was totally true. And that was fine. I came to that realization right at the edge of when Wi-Fi cut out. There's a large section of the Washington route here on this day that you simply don't have a cell signal. Now, I didn't have a cell signal on AT&T. I did not have my iPad, which is a Verizon iPad, nor did I have my T-Mobile, but I think we can all know for sure that the T-Mobile wasn't going to work. They just don't. Their range is much more in cities and whatnot. But since I was off of US 101 for a good chunk, it was unlikely that I was going to be getting anything until I got back basically down to the Columbia River, and that was totally true. I mentioned that 101 was giving me good shoulders, but the roads, it was Washington State Highway 4 and 401, which is a way to sort of bypass and keep your line straight to the south, and really connects you up with the bridge across the Columbia River really well. The downside is you lose out on going out towards Long Beach and El Waco and some other places where if you are going to the coast and riding the coast for the coast's sake, that you may want to kind of go out and do that side. I wanted to do this part of the route. Turns out I did. There's been a lot more timber, work that has been done. So the terrain is all very different. It looked very different. It felt like I hadn't ridden this before, even though I look at it and I know that I have. The views are, it's funny. It's if you have expectations of, Whitecap Mountains, or that you're going to see, beautiful vistas, over, the bays and whatnot. This part of the ride may be a little disappointing. I happen to like it. I mean, there were, views of the rivers as you were going out down Willapa Bay eventually, and then you're sort of inland going through basically timber country, Christmas tree farms, things like that. I found it to be really pretty. The weather was fantastic too. I mentioned before that it was a really chilly start. It was 37 degrees, and I have a picture that if you followed along on the socials, of frost covering a whole bunch of different surfaces. So I had all my layers on, and felt perfectly fine. It was probably my most comfortable day physically riding, because I kept fuel in me, and I was perfectly warm. I was able to strip off layers as the temperatures went up, and they did go up. Ended up being about 62 as a high, which was fantastic. Really nice day, akin to some of the days that you have during the summers, which was really nice. Caught a lot of sun. Didn't expect that. It was a full sunny day, but that didn't bother me because the temperatures were kind of nice and temperate. So at the edge of the cell signal, I decided to call the day or the attempt to make the 245 bus. I knew that I would be rushing to get it. I would have to push to do it, and then I would have to push at the very end of this particular tour. Preview was crossing the Columbia using the think it's the Megler Bridge to Astoria. And it's a little bit of a harrowing experience if you're not used to it. I've only done it twice, and there's also one very big steep incline to get up to the upper section of the bridge that basically makes it high enough for ships to pass through. And I knew that rushing to get there and then having to do that a little bit tired was probably not the best idea. So I thought, you know what? Let me just make this a little more casual so I can take some more breaks and not have to worry about it. And so I bought the ticket from the edge of the cell phone hole, and which was great. You're able to do that using an Amtrak app if you want, or Greyhound, or any of a variety of different ways. But I happen to have the Amtrak app on my phone. Worked out great. So then I knew I have a ticket, so I didn't have to stress about that. And then I just sort of kept rolling, and it was beautiful and nice. I ended up stopping at that one town. It was sort of at the intersection, I believe, right before the cutoff from 101 goes to Highway 4. If you're playing the home game and you have a map in front of you. And it was just basically a gas station. But I'm glad I did go there, because I would have run out of water, I think, if I hadn't. And I've talked about this before. The mental state of being low on water is not good for me. So it was great. I went there. I was able to get a nice little caffeinated beverage, and I was able to fill up the water bottle. So I felt good. I also happened to get a pizza. Yeah. Cause I was getting sick of those, what do you call them? Egg wraps. By that point, I only had a couple left. So, I mixed it up and had some pizza. So it was like a calorie bomb day for me yesterday, but I'm glad I did, because it was helpful. The Highway 401 section's really nice and scenic, pretty rolling, the same kind of terrain, but I felt good. I had good, energy, and went through it and got down to the base of the bridge, and it was a little bit before, let's see, maybe a touch before 4:00. And so I rested up, knowing that it's basically, it's a 3 mile. I don't want to say it's a sprint, but it's long, and it's predominantly either flat or uphill. You get very little downhill until the very, very end. You get a nice payback at the end in Astoria. But, I remembered it being a narrower shoulder than it is. And so, when I'm timing the traffic and all that, knowing that, there's going to be plenty of cars that are going to pass you on a 3 mile long, bridge. You still want to kind of get off to a good start. And then once I kind of hopped on and got there, I was like, oh, no, this is better than I thought. It's better than I remembered. If the shoulder is clear of debris, it's about 3 feet from the edge of the bridge to your right, to the white line, through the white line. It's a single lane of traffic. So you're going to have people passing you at highway speeds relatively quickly. The good news is there's a sign at the beginning of the bridge. And again, I had pretty good luck. I don't think that I had anybody that was actively trying to just stay in their lane and, whatever, or do anything untoward towards me. Most people actually gave me a little bit of berth if there wasn't oncoming traffic, which was really nice and appreciated, because it is a little tough. I mean, you're on this little narrow strip in the middle of one of the biggest rivers in the world, and you're just like, okay, let's just head down, let's do it. And it's really kind of too bad, because the views from there could be just startlingly amazing, but really, it doesn't feel right to stop and take it in at any point on there. Pedestrians are prohibited from being on that bridge. And I've often wondered what law enforcement would consider a pedestrian if you kind of hopped off your bike and stopped for reasons that didn't have to do with, a mechanical or something like that. Wow, what a terrible place to get a flat. I just realized, holy moly. You wouldn't have a lot of room to maneuver and handle that. And I think with the debris that sometimes gets on that bridge, you could run into that, from time to time. There's stuff, including, I'm always amazed at what ends up on the bridge. In addition to, basically a lot of bark and stuff like that. There was a Washington state license tag, and
half regret not stopping to pick it up, but it was a real one, and it was one of those vanity ones, and it said crabby. I think that would have been pretty great to have. But yeah, I thought, oh, well, it's possible this person might be coming back for it. So it was kind of a nice thing. But also I didn't have time to even stop and take a picture of it. So you're going to have to take my word for it. It was crabby. So, approaching the large, I mean, really steep incline to get to the elevated section of the bridge. Man, that is something else. But, I promised myself that I wasn't going to try to hop off and walk. 3 feet is just not enough room. And you really got to kind of go for it. And I got up about, I'd say 85% of the way before I said, you know what? It seems like everything's cool. The traffic was a little lighter. I'm just going to, hop off straddle for 60 seconds and catch my breath. And I'm really glad I did that. Gave me a chance to get a little bit of a view, which was nice. And then I was able to go on and finish it off without a problem. Once you get to the top of that bridge, first of all, it feels really good because okay, it's all downhill from here. And it really is. It's this big winding corkscrew that kind of spits you out in the town of Astoria. And it's nice. And you're going about as fast as traffic. So if you've got a mirror like I did and notice that there's no traffic immediately behind you, taking the lane there is a really obvious thing to do. And it was really great. So yeah, once I got there, my brother had recommended a place called Bowie Beer or Bowie Brewing Company. Really recommended. It's not very far from the transit station in Astoria. And it was really quite excellent. I had 2 IPAs and knocked me on my butt. I think it's probably because my body was, probably a little dehydrated and, blah, 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 empty stomach, the drill. But, cool place. I have to say, Astoria has changed dramatically since I first was introduced to it in the 90s. It was a sleepy town with not very much going for it back then. The fishing industry had really collapsed. It was just not a great place. It was depressing and, not very fun to go to. Fast forward, and this is a town that's as vibrant as Newport is now. It's got tons of stuff going in the downtown area. Tons of hotels have popped up. It's really revitalized its tourism industry, which is fantastic because, it's always great to see towns like this find ways to wake up and take advantage of their natural surroundings because it's a beautiful area. There's just so much to do and so much to see. So I'm really glad that it has improved. And, brewing companies like Bowie and some other places like that, that's really fantastic. So I was able to have enough time there to enjoy those couple of beers, take a bunch of pictures, try to catch up on social. A lot of comments on this trip, which was really great. Then I hopped over on the bus and rode over a couple of blocks and then just sort of took down the bike, took off the backpack, packed everything up, had 3 pieces, had the bike in stealth mode, had the backpack, and had the shoulder bag. No problem, was able to put the backpack and the bike under. The bus driver recognized that it was a bike, didn't care, and actually was just like, oh, it's cool, it's one of those folding bikes. I was like, yeah, and it was great. It was so nice to not worry about it or have to think about it, which was pretty good because a lot of times these places will be like, oh, it's a bike. It must be in a box and it must be this and it must be that. And it's an extra fee. And the driver, who was excellent, she just didn't care. She was one of the best bus experiences I think I've had going back and forth on the coast. It was quite good. Got into Portland and was happy to hear that my nephew was coming back from the ER and doing fine. And that was great. And literally as I was riding back, I was crossing Killingsworth, which is the last major street before basically I get to where my brother's place is. And I noticed a Prius turning left that was preventing me from crossing. And I was like, one car stops me from being able to cross, and now I got to wait for other traffic. And I was like, oh, wait, that's my brother. So they literally got to the place maybe 60 seconds before me, which I thought was kind of funny. So it was a great way to end things. And I mean, although it was not cool to know that my nephew was in the ER, things got a lot. He improved immediately and was able to get released and go back. So I was able to celebrate. And normally he would have been in bed by the time I got back, which was just shy of 10 o'clock. But he was up because he had just gotten back. So I got a little bonus time with him, which was cool. So anyways, it was a really fun trip and a really great way to do the Puget Sound area. Bicycling Washington is not something I do very often, but I'm glad I did this. I'm glad I did with the Brompton. It made this trip possible the way that I did it. I think there's going to be so much more to talk about in episode 111 of the pod, where I think I'm going to do a little more of a deep dive on the Brompton as a touring bike, just adding more layers to what I've already talked about it before, because I think that this trip really solidified its role for me in terms of being a touring bike and what it can really open up. So it was a really fantastic trip. Glad you were along for the ride. Go check out all the stuff on pedalshift.net for lots more. Thanks for joining.
So I hope you enjoyed the newest version, Volume 9 of Pedalshift Tour Journals. It was a lot of fun to put together. It was a fun ride. You know, it's interesting always looking back on these things. I don't know if I feel like I'm sort of complaining in the moment, or if I'm sort of like, hey, look at all these challenges and I'm sort of resigned to what's going on. But we talk about Type 2 fun, which I know was championed by, I wish I could remember who I could give the, Ethan, you had the citation for who came up with Type 2 fun, Ethan Georgie, friend of the show. But the interesting part about the whole experience looking back on these is how much fun it was in retrospect. And Type 2 fun is exactly that in the moment, it can be a real haul, real hassle. But, you end up going, oh, that was a pretty cool trip. And I'm really glad I did it. And I'm glad I did it the way that I did it, too. I'm really super stoked that I was able to take the Brompton and really test its limits. Not in terms of hills. I did that before. I did that a couple of years ago. But I think its real limits on this one were using buses, using trains, using ferries, really stretching and knowing that if I ever wanted to do a truly mobile tour, which seems like an overstatement or an understatement. I mean, tours are by their very nature mobile, but to be able to quickly and efficiently hop off the bike, convert it into its folded state, and throw a backpack over my shoulder, throw the front bag over my shoulder, and then get walking and moving and stow stuff. It was a really, really good way to do it. I'm not sure if it's the best way to tour on a Brompton, but this way, the way that I did it, is definitely the best way to do it if you're hopping on and off of transit a lot. So I'm pretty excited about kind of tinkering with the system that much more and getting that front bag especially to be that much more carryable compared to what I did a couple of years ago. I am very interested in the prospects of eliminating the backpack at some point in the future. Not because I think the backpack is a bad idea. I think the backpack and the dowel trick and all the stuff that I talked about, I think that's a really great idea. But if you don't need to be hopping on and off of transit as much, the backpack actually represents a lot of bulk and maybe more weight than is necessary. So I'm thinking of doing some kind of a modification to the setup that was actually a lot more like that Pedalshift Tour Journal from way back in the day when I did that crazy transit-aided tour that was way more about transit than bicycling on the old Dayhan. And I think that that might be something to think about for a truly ultra-light way of doing it on a Brompton. I do think that I can reduce things down into a couple of stuff sacks that might be a little bit lower profile, a little bit easier to handle. And although it wouldn't be as easy to carry around once you got them off of the bike, I might come up with something like a larger duffel or something like that. Maybe something that's made of nylon or something that would be super light and could be stuffed in one of those stuff sacks and used to carry everything once you're out and about. I do think that the system was really good for a dry ride. I think that it was fine for the wet ride, but I do think that if you are considering riding in conditions that are going to be this wet for a long period of time. Now, granted, it was only just that first day that was wet. You may want to consider a system that includes some waterproof interiors inside of that backpack. I don't think that backpack rain cover would have held up for more than a day or two of that rain. It turned out that it worked pretty well. I was actually kind of surprised at how well the rain covers worked. But I also know that on day after day of pummeling rain, that it would be pretty bad. I also had a chance to dry everything out following that first night in the hotel. So I think that made things a lot easier and better for the subsequent days riding. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.